That's great.
Mr. Toastmaster members and guests, before I begin, one piece of business I think is in order. This is our birthday. Anniversary, birthday. Let's say happy anniversary. To ourselves. Thank you. All right. All right. I have a dream. The speech delivered by Dr. Martin Luther King, August 1963, in Washington, D.C., during the March on Washington, was never intended to be delivered. This is a fact. A fact validated and confirmed by Clarence Jones. Clarence Jones was Dr. King's speechwriter and his attorney. Clarence Jones authored the book, Behind the Dream. I used this book as my primary source to develop the story that I'm sharing with you this evening. I will reveal how this speech came to be. And you, all of you, including me, have something we share with Dr. King, and I'll point that out a little later. Let's begin. I want you to travel with me back in time to the historic day in Washington, D.C. Let's go to that March on Washington together. The date, August 28, 1963. It was humid and hot. In spite of the beautiful blue skies that day, the heat and the humidity did not keep 250,000 people from showing up, gathered that day in Washington, D.C. They marched and they ultimately gathered around the Lincoln Memorial. So many people that they went down both sides of the reflection pool and on towards the Washington Monument. They came from all around. Every state was represented. Many countries were represented. Many religions. There were people who were all ages, all ethnic, racial, cultural representation. 250,000 people. Thousands more watched on television and listened on the radio. This was the largest gathering ever to come to the nation's capital to bring awareness to civil rights and injustice. It was one amazing day. People from Hollywood came. Stars of that time, Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, Charlton Heston. Popular singers of that day came and performed. You recognize Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. Gospel singer Mahalia Jackson and world famous singer Marian Anderson performed on that day. The leaders of the civil rights movement at that time, the NAACP and the National Urban League leaders spoke. And then came Dr. King. He was introduced. He was the last one on the program. Dr. King was introduced. He comes to the podium and he looks out and he sees all these people. People who had been marching all day, standing, listening, and waiting. and they were waiting for him. He comes up to the podium and he begins to speak. He says, I'm happy to be here today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration in our nation's capital for civil rights and injustice. He went on to say that 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand here, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He continued to speak for several minutes, and then something unexpected happened. Over on the side, a voice spoke. That voice said, Martin, tell them about your dream. Martin, tell them about your dream. But there was no evidence that Dr. King heard that voice, so he continued reading his notes to his speech. And he said, in essence, we've come to the nation's capital today to cash a check. A check. We come to this nation today to cash a check. When the architects of this great republic wrote those magnificent words to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they signed a promissory note. And instead of honoring that promissory note that is based on the guarantees of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, America has given the Negro a bad check. A check that has been returned marked insufficient funds. Again, over here on the side, that voice speaks up again. This time louder, more demanding, more insisting. Martin, tell them about your dream, Martin. Tell them about your dream. This time, it's believed that Dr. King heard it. And what a conflict that caused him. There he was, giving the speech of his life, following the notes that had been prepared, planned, speech. And over there on the side was someone urging him to tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream. 8-10 minutes went on into the speech, and he kept struggling with this. Do I stay with my speech, or do I do what this voice is telling me? You see, Dr. King knew that voice. He knew who it was speaking to him. He knew what that voice was urging him to do. He knew what was meant by the dream. Had never given a sermon or a speech titled The Dream. He had made passing references at various times during his speech about the dream, but never had he given a speech about the dream. And he had no intentions that day of talking about his dream. He had to make a decision. He did. He took a moment and he looked out at that crowd. It was the largest stage he's ever stood on in his life as the leader of the civil rights. It was the largest group of people that's ever been assembled during his time as the leader of the civil rights. It was the most important message that he could ever deliver to this group in the world about civil rights. And then he made that decision. Dr. King, he pushed aside his notes. As he looked out at that crowd, he saw people who had been deprived of their lives in many ways, deprived of their pursuit of happiness and their liberties. And he began to speak. He said, let us not wallow in the valley of despair. Even though we have difficulties today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. I have a dream that is deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will one day sit down at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. I have a dream that down in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering in the heat of injustice, a state sweltering in the heat of oppression, one day will rise up and be transformed into an oasis of justice and freedom. Oh, America, I have a dream. I have a dream that one day my four little children will grow up to live in a nation that will no longer judge them on the color of the skin, but on the content of the character. I have a dream, America, that down in there in the state of Alabama, a state with its vicious racists and its governor's lips dripping with words of interposition and nullification. Oh yeah. One day in that state of Alabama, little black boys and little black girls are going to join hands one day with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. Oh, I have a dream, America. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day all the valleys will be exalted. All the hills and the mountains will be made low. All the rough places will be made plain. And all the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. That's my dream, America. That's my dream. Yes. Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. A dream speech that we almost never heard. We came this close to never hearing that dream. We came this close to never hearing that dream, that voice. That message was so powerful that within moments after the speech, television, radio, all around the world were proclaiming Dr. King just delivered his I Have a Dream speech. I have a dream speech. It was though the first 15 minutes of his speech did not matter. 250,000 people that day heard that part of his speech. 60 years later, we're still talking about I Have a Dream speech. That's why your card's on the table. Most of us are not familiar with it, but we talk about it. That speech was so powerful that it's ranked up to the top with the other great speeches in our nation. John F. Kennedy said, "Don't ask what the country can do for you." Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." And Abraham Lincoln said 77 years ago, these speeches were planned, they were prepared, they were delivered, but not I Have a Dream. And it ranks up there with those. Okay, who was it? Who was it that urged Dr. King to speak that day? Who had the nerve, who had the audacity to interrupt the leader of the civil rights movement on the biggest stage of his career?
His wife.
All of those are good guesses. All of those are potentially the right answers. Mahalia Jackson. I heard it. Mahalia Jackson. Mahalia Jackson and Dr. King were good friends. She had heard Dr. King make reference over the past when she was performing while he was giving sermons and speeches. She would often sing during his sermons and his church services. She knew Dr. King. She had heard bits and pieces of this speech, and she urged him that day. I cannot imagine, you cannot imagine, giving a speech and there's someone saying something like that. It could only happen because it was supposed to happen. Mahalia knew Dr. King's heart, and Dr. King trusted her judgment. And this is where we as Toastmasters come into this. Those of us who venture out and do crazy things like this, speaking in front of people, we run the risk of Mahalia Jackson speaking to us externally, and we run the risk of our own voice speaking to us, internal voices. It could be our own voice saying, "Don't do this, don't say that." It could be the voice of a teacher, of a friend who's talking to us while we're talking to you. We have to make split-second decisions under some most unbelievable conditions. You and me, we could have a Dr. King moment. We could have an I Have a Dream moment where we have to do or say something, and look what might happen. We might be talked about 60 years later. Who knows? But that wasn't the end of Dr. King's speech. That was an unpaid Toastmaster comment. So I'm going back to the story. That wasn't the end of the speech. Dr. King, a Southern Baptist minister, if you have any familiarity with Southern Baptist ministers, you don't speak without an altar call. 250,000 people, an altar call. But he did a call to action. He said, go back to your communities and your towns and your cities and your states. Go back peacefully, nonviolently. Help build those communities. Help those communities become what they were intended to be. Help those communities be and do what they're supposed to be. He called it, go back and ring that bell of freedom. Ring that bell of freedom. He said, let freedom ring in those prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring on the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring on the hills and the valleys of the Alleghenies in Pennsylvania. And let them ring. Let freedom ring on the snow-capped Rockies in Colorado. Let freedom ring on the curvaceous slopes of California. But not just there. No, not just there. Let freedom ring on Stone Mountain, Georgia. Let freedom ring on Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. And this is my favorite. Let freedom ring on every hill, on every molehill in Mississippi. Let freedom ring. He said, if we let freedom ring on every mountainside, every city, every hamlet, every village, every state, it will help speed up that day. It will help speed up that day when all God's children, black, white, Jew, Gentile, Catholic, and Protestant, will all come together and sing the words to that old Negro spiritual. You're going to help me now. Free at last.
Free at last.
Free at last.
Free at last.
Oh, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Thank you.